Welcome to the Disney Wedding Podcast. This show is brought to you by Carrie Hayward's Fairy Tale Weddings Guide, the only guidebook and bridal organizer tailored exclusively to Disney's fairy tale weddings at Walt Disney World. I'm Carrie Hayward, and each week I feature Disney wedding updates, money-saving tips, and interviews with wedding vendors and real Disney couples. I also cover honeymoons, anniversaries, and engagements at the Disney parks and resorts. Join me now as the Disney Wedding Podcast celebrates romance at Disney destinations. Today on the Disney Wedding Podcast, I'm speaking with Disney grooms Eigil Pantaleon and Andrew Mananquil about their wedding at the Wedding Pavilion with a reception at American Adventure Rotunda in EPCOT. I thought you guys would be interested to hear how they chose these locations and how they planned everything and how it all turned out. So welcome, Eigil and Andrew.
Hi, Carrie.
Hey, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for being on the show today. Well, I would love to start at the very beginning and find out how you two decided that you wanted to have your wedding at Disney.
Me and Eigil started dating in 2011, and for our 5-year anniversary, I wanted to surprise him with a trip to Disney. So I planned that all out, surprised him. We went over to Florida, and lo and behold, we were just walking in the Grand Floridian, not knowing what the Wedding Pavilion was. And we were like, oh, it's open. It was open to the public at that time. And we were like walking in and feeling inspired and just feeling the good energy in there. And we're like, EJ was like, one of these days you're going to marry me here. And years later, it eventually happened. So that's our story as to how it happened.
The funny part is, after I actually proposed, I initially was like, let's not have a big ceremony. Let's not get married anywhere. And then Andrew convinced me, let's just do it. And then in the process of us figuring it all out, that's how we ended up back at Disney.
That's awesome. So how did your friends and family react when they found out where the wedding was going to be?
My family, they kind of looked at it like, really? But my cousins and friends were all like, oh man, this is going to be amazing. I haven't been there since I was a kid.
And my parents were definitely concerned about money, of course. But, when it comes to comparing the amount of money that we would have spent in Florida to what we would have spent in New Jersey, it was pretty comparable. So why not end it at Disney?
That's wonderful. How many guests did you invite and how many were able to make the trip?
We invited about 200 guests and 123 guests actually came.
Wow, that's awesome. Did you set up a room block for them?
We set up at the Grand Destino in Coronado Springs and at Pop Century.
Got it. Okay. Now, how did you guys choose the day of the week and time of day for your event?
Originally, when we were thinking about choosing, and once we decided on Disney, I was considering to be a little bit more budget conscious, so I was going for a weekday. And then I wanted to go during food and wine, so I had to pick a specific time of the year. And then we were also trying to figure out how to accommodate specific guests that we wanted to be there. And it ended up having to land the day before my parents' wedding anniversary. And by coincidence, it became our closest friend's wedding anniversary as well. So, yeah.
I take it the time of day was dictated by the fact that you wanted to use American Adventure Rotunda?
A little bit. I was trying to optimize daylight and the way photography would work. So I ended up choosing our time for the Wedding Pavilion also to accommodate. We had people coming in from Thailand, California, up and down the East Coast. So a few different time zones we had to mix some things around, and then as well as wanting to have it at American Rotunda. So we just kept the reception for late at night regardless, and then moved our ceremony time to accommodate people's sleeping schedules.
Oh, interesting. So what times did you pick?
We ended up having a noon ceremony so we can do some early morning pics for our family and for our wedding party photos before the pavilion. And then over the afternoon light, we also wanted golden hour photos. So it was perfect for us to have that split in between.
Got it. Okay. Sometimes people get anxious about having a break between the ceremony and the reception. How did your guests feel about that?
I mean, when they heard about it, I think initially everybody was like, what are we going to do? And then when we talked to our guests during cocktail hour and after the fact, everybody was like, it was great. We had lunch. I took a nap. I was ready for this. So
That's great. I always recommend napping.
yes, especially with a late night reception.
That's great. So it sounds like you fell in love with the Wedding Pavilion when you first visited it. Is that how you chose that for your ceremony?
I think also came down to we are a fairly traditional couple. We wanted to do the traditional things, especially that were a part of the wedding ceremonies from our culture. And the Wedding Pavilion was the closest thing that we would get to a church, considering we couldn't have one in a church.
That's interesting. What sorts of things did you incorporate into the ceremony from your culture?
So we're both Filipino, and we wanted to be able to do things like a candle ceremony where our godparents or our sponsors would light the candles, and then we would also have cords where it would like unite us, a veiling ceremony, as well as coins that would also represent like our fidelity and how we would support each other. So we wanted to put that in there. And typically it all happens in a church, but we wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity and show like how we could do it ourselves as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, how did you choose American Adventure Rotunda as your reception venue?
So American Rotunda offered a lot of things that other locations at Disney wasn't as flexible as. We looked at multiple places. We looked at Citrico's, we looked at California Grill. You know, those places are great locations, but given the number of guests that were attending, we needed some kind of big space with a big dance floor because we are a family and friend group of huge dancers. And the other location we looked at was one of the halls in Coronado Springs where they do their business conventions and stuff. So that did provide the space, but I was very adamant about having some kind of natural light source that space couldn't provide. Yeah, you know, like American Rotunda also doesn't have that window lighting that I was looking for, but it really provided the atmosphere and the space that we needed for our wedding.
Got it. Okay. Did you guys use any outside vendors for the portions of your event that you were able to?
Yeah, so we picked up the Bella Agency for hair and makeup, Merrily Married for our videography, Lazat photography, and for our getting ready, we actually ordered stuff from Publix and Sugar Dough Bakehouse for our breakfast items.
That's wonderful. Did I see you wore a cape?
Yeah, I actually had designed a veil for our veil ceremony, and it ended up looking like a cape because we had it draped over our shoulders when we took photos at the Grand Floridian before our wedding. We had it done in India and a shop here local to New Jersey. It's called Nazrana in Islington, New Jersey. So we had it custom done there.
Now, how did you guys choose your officiant?
Funny story about that. Neither of my brothers wanted to have the duties of being a best man, but they wanted to participate. So I also wanted to incorporate our vendors to have some kind of relation or connection to our celebration. And my brother has a great speaking voice, and I wanted to give him something to do. So that's how I picked him.
That's wonderful. Did you guys add any kind of entertainment to the ceremony or the reception?
Yes, we had DJ Steve Dunlap. He was one of the DJs that Disney provided for us. And his energy was great throughout the night, keeping us dancing, keeping us entertained. He even knew some of the Filipino line dances that are very common in our culture. And I was just so surprised to see him doing that on the dance floor with us. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah, he also was able to do and incorporate what's very common for us during our reception is a cultural money dance. And a fun spin that we wanted to add was we wanted to make sure we had pictures with every single one of our guests. So he incorporated a fun little game where we would run to every table and each of the tables would pose, and the best table, by round of applause, would get bragging rights for the photos. So we were able to get all the photos with every single guest at each table. And it was a fun little activity to take up some time and have us interact with everybody.
That's great. And I love that you were running, so it didn't take too much time.
No, it was a quick round.
It was like 5 minutes, like 5-7 minutes.
That's great.
And the last 15 minutes, because both of us are millennials and we had a pop punk emo era in our lives, we saved the last 15 minutes for Steve to play like the top 50 songs. And so we were all just rocking out to stuff that, we normally wouldn't be able to dance to during a wedding. And it's just a bunch of millennial kids in the center of the dance floor in the last 15 minutes screaming our hearts out. It was great.
Now, do you guys have any menu items or cake flavors that you would recommend?
Yeah, so our 2 cake flavors, we actually didn't choose a large cake. We didn't think it was very necessary. So we went with a small 6-inch cake, which was dark chocolate filling with a dark chocolate cake. And then we had 2 sheet cakes that they cut up in the back. We had the Dole Whip cake and then another chocolate on chocolate cake. So we got a little bit of difference mixed up in there. And then as for menu items, the great thing about working with the chefs or going to the food tasting is that they will adapt anything and everything for you. We didn't want to have a typical sit-down dinner, so we had created a buffet and 2 action stations. We had a custom pasta station that could accommodate our gluten-free friends as well as our pescatarian friends. And so we had huge sea scallops for that at the pasta station. And then we had the martini station, which was risotto, mac and cheese, a whole bunch of mashed potatoes, and a lot of different options to mix in with that, which was great. And then, yeah, we had so many different dietary restrictions. So the chefs did a wonderful job mixing in different options for us to custom create and make sure everybody got some type of food.
That's wonderful. Now, did you guys add a dessert party or a welcome party to your day?
We didn't necessarily have one at Disney, but what Filipinos typically do is, especially in EJ's family, we'll rent out a huge home that everyone stays at. So this was like a 12-bedroom estate in Davenport, Florida. Tons of Filipino food. Both our families attended. That was the first time that both sides of families were meeting. So it was a nice experience for all of us to be under one roof for the first time. So afterwards, we met at the Dahlia Lounge at Destino Tower. A whole bunch of our friends and families just came upstairs to the rooftop, and we just had a quick drink to celebrate the wedding the night before.
That's awesome. Now, can you give my listeners a timeline of how the wedding day ran?
Yes, we both woke up at 5 a.m. and then the Bella agency arrived around 5:45. Shortly after they set up, we did hair and makeup from 6 to 8. And then we did photography and videography with just our wedding party and family on Coronado Springs from 8 to about 12. Then 12 was our ceremony. And then from there, because we had such a large gap, we ended up having our grand exit, and we took more photos at the Grand Floridian for an extended period of time. And funny part about that part of the day was there was no other weddings happening that day. So we were actually able to monopolize the time at the Wedding Pavilion and take some extra snapshots that most people normally don't get, which was luck of the draw. But after that, we ended up going back to Coronado Springs, and we took a little bit of break and we took a nap. And then once we woke up, we got back into our reception clothes and took like golden hour photos around Coronado Springs. And then we met up with our friends and family at the pickup point at Coronado, and we took some photos with them outside there. And then we got into EPCOT, where we had our cocktail hour, which was supposed to happen in Italy, Isola, but ended up being indoors at American Rotunda. And we took more photos in there as guests came in. And then we had our reception. Then from our reception, we started with our walk-in. It was just us, right into our first dance, mother-son dance. We had a separate opening and a welcome speech to welcome our guests. And then we had dinner, speeches, dancing, cake cutting, and then we inserted our money dance and then ended with dessert.
That's great. Now, since your Italy Isola cocktail hour got rained out, were you able to go out and see the fireworks?
We were. It just so happened that the weekend that we went down, we really weren't worried about the weather, but right before our wedding, that's when Hurricane Ian came that year. So we actually we were fine. We had great weather. It was just a little tad humid, but they did decide to move the cocktail hour indoors, but they still had fireworks. It didn't rain that night. And then it just so happened the following day, the hurricane came. So we lucked out that we had sun, we had mixed bag clouds, which actually made great for our photos. But yeah, it worked out.
That's awesome. When you guys were planning, what were some of the most important aspects where you focused your attention or your budget?
I think what I focus on most is just making sure that our guests that came from all different parts of the world were having a great experience with us on our wedding day. Like EJ mentioned before, we wanted to make sure that food was one of our primary focuses. Usually, sit-down meals aren't our favorite options when we go to weddings, so we wanted to make sure that the buffets had tons of options for our guests. Another thing that we focused on was going to be comfort. So, like what EJ mentioned before, the weather is very unpredictable in Florida. As much as we would have wanted a ceremony or a reception outdoors, I didn't want to risk it being too hot or being rained on. So the choices that we made in our venues was definitely based on that as well.
Yeah, some of the things that I think of now is we really strive to have that type of representation of cultural excellence. And what I mean by that is there's some really unique pieces to Filipino weddings that aren't often seen, or that a lot of Filipinos of our generation just kind of all assimilated off. So we wanted to make sure that, we can do that, and for other people to see that, like, us guys that come from the LGBT plus community, that we can have that and we can be a part of it as well. And it can be done very well. And then the biggest budget part that I focused on was that veil. It became maybe like a whole 12-week process while we were planning the wedding. I was also seeking out the details to finishing that veil / cape. And every minute detail was done with intentional decision making. So I always focused on, every time I made a decision, how does this mean, or how does this represent our culture? And I wanted to make sure that our vendors connected, our guests would connect, and that no matter what time of year or when we look back on our ceremony or our reception, we knew we did justly by all of it.
That's fantastic. Were there any aspects that were less important, where you saved your money or just your effort?
We thought about a lot of different things that we thought we wanted to have, and because of where everybody came from and people were traveling long distances, we realized things like party favors wouldn't matter, or like nobody would have room to take things back. And to save money, we eliminated the photo booth. And our invitations, we actually saved a ton of money on by choosing to go digital evites and using a wedding website, so we can track all of our responses, our hits, questions, or anything by. And then table settings and decor, we just used the standard linens and chairs that it came with. And then we eliminated personal floral for our wedding party.
That's great. Okay, so out of all of this, what ended up being each of your favorite memories of your wedding day?
My favorite wedding memory actually is a part of Andrew's vows. And to this day, I distinctly remember him saying, "Loving you is so easy. It's like breathing." And that's in our wedding video. And every single time, sometimes I look at him and that's the first thing I hear. So favorite memory, hands down, is listening to him say his vows.
Oh, thank you. And my favorite memories, I have two. So throughout the process of planning this wedding, EJ was the one that was stressing out a lot, and I would be the rock that would bring him back and settle him back down. And I did not think that once you open those doors to see all your guests at the wedding pavilion, what kind of reaction I would have. And I guess I just released all this pent up energy and emotion, and I was crying down the aisle, and the photos are hilarious, but I will never forget that. That was a great memory for me, and I'm sure all of our guests. Another great memory from this wedding was at the end of the wedding. At the wedding pavilion, we were about to leave, and the day of coordination team pulled us aside and just talked about how great of a wedding that we had and what they experienced and saw as well. And we didn't expect them to give us a gift or anything. So when we were presented with something, it was a piece of the chandelier from the live action Cinderella movie from 2015. And EJ is a huge Cinderella fan. So when we received this gift from them, it was hands down. They're so thankful for them for making this day perfect.
That's wonderful. So then, did anything go wrong or just not turn out like you expected?
A few things went wrong. Nothing super major. Obviously, with the weather and the cocktail hour being outside, like we discussed earlier, it wasn't mentioned to us until we actually got into EPCOT. I wish we were notified of that, a little bit earlier, so my expectation wouldn't have been like, oh, well, like, why are we like setting up inside? But it was only told to us when we got to EPCOT. But nevertheless, we still had a great time during our cocktail hour. And then during dinner, a Filipino dish that we traditionally have is called lumpia. And it is a popular street food with savory vegetables and chopped meat, like inside for a filling. But we ended up getting the Pongo lumpia from Animal Kingdom's Pandora, which is kind of like a dessert item with cream cheese and diced pineapple inside. So when we bit into it, we were a bit surprised because we expected, meat and vegetables, and we got dessert. So we notified we notified our coordinator really quickly. They corrected the sign and they apologized for that. But the guests loved that too. So it didn't really affect anything. These were very little things that happened to us, but we still had the perfect wedding.
I think the last thing that happened was when we were leaving Coronado Springs to go to our ceremony. Some people from our wedding party, primarily our parents, got lost. They ended up on the DVC side of Grand Floridian instead of ending up at the wedding pavilion. But the day of coordinators were great. Once we realized that they were missing or it was taking them time, they're like, oh, we know exactly where they'll end up. And so they picked them up and walked them right over. So it was great.
That's wonderful. Now, was there anything that seemed like a big deal beforehand or you were worried about, and then it turned out not to be a big deal?
Yeah, a lot of the tinier details. I think at the beginning when we thought about planning this wedding, stuff like the invitation, the table setting details, the favors, all of those little decisions that for me felt a little bit tedious and slightly overwhelming. When we look back to what we really wanted or what our guests would appreciate more, it just kind of like melted away, and we're like, we could save a ton of money by just mixing all of it. And then the last part was worrying about certain guests not being able to come. At the end of the day, we can't control what people's lives are or what happens. And the people who wanted and needed to be there ended up being there.
Fantastic. Is there anything you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I think something that not a lot of people tend to expect is the sheer volume and the sheer cost of a Disney wedding. So better financial planning would have helped. We did do some things to rectify it, and I think we prepared as best as we could because we kind of, by the time we had decided to do a Disney wedding, it was already 10 months in, and trying to scramble a Disney wedding budget of our volume for our guest size was a challenge, but we made sure, had we known when we were engaged 2 years prior, I think it would have been a little bit easier. Also, spacing out our events. I think we crammed a lot in because on top of having, the dress rehearsal, a welcome evening, and then 2 park shoots, we kind of stacked them all up against each other one day after the other. And by the time everybody had left, it was just us at the park. We were almost completely zonked and didn't want to do much. And it took us maybe a full 48 hours to recover from the wedding activities. And then I think the only other thing is, I would have probably sprung for an extra transportation bus to the wedding pavilion instead of just having it free for all and having us go there via Lyft or Uber.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So do you guys have any other tips or advice for future Disney couples?
First and foremost, I would like to say that your wedding guide, Carrie, has been our Bible, our guiding source from the moment that we said yes to our contract. And listening to the podcast was something that we did regularly to, double check if there was anything we were missing or if we wanted to add something or there was a little trick. The other part is Disney wedding planning is a financial marathon and not a sprint. If you can plan a budget or if you can save up as early as you can. We did a few, money saving challenges to catch up, but, if you have the time, save up for it. And it's no problem if you have to, extend or put it off till later. It's a lot easier when you take your time with it. Another big tip, I think, would be, set clear intentions that can be constantly referred to when making your decisions. That way, if you're struggling about, do I really need something, you have a core morale or a core idea to go back to and actually stay firm on your foundation on what you want. And then I think setting communications cadences with your vendor's wedding planner is really, really important. If you can send an email that's less than 100 words, using bullet points for all your questions, and setting up a cadence for, when your next meeting is, I think that's very helpful so you could set expectations for yourself and set an agenda for all of those meetings. It's going to save you, the stress of knowing when you're going to hear back, and exactly what you're going to get into with every single meeting with your wedding planner.
That's great advice. And I'm so glad you found the podcast and the Fairy Tale Weddings Guide helpful.
Oh, extremely. Especially with budget.
Way helpful.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Andrew and Eigil, I think you've offered a lot of great tips and advice for anyone who's interested in getting married or having a vow renewal at Walt Disney World. And I appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you, Carrie. It was an honor to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
That's our show for today. I'm your host, Carrie Hayward, inviting you to join me again next week for another episode of the Disney Wedding Podcast. Past shows and tons of photos for each episode are available on my website, DisneyWeddingPodcast.com, or listen in your favorite podcast app. And for instant answers to all your Walt Disney World wedding questions, check out Carrie Hayward's Fairy Tale Weddings Guide, available as an interactive ebook with continual free updates at fairytaleweddingsguide.com.